My name's Patrick Terry, and I'm the CEO at the Columbus, Ohio Council on World Affairs. I'm delighted to be joined by Annie Prusi, who's at the Pittsburgh World Affairs Council, and walking up now, Xiaoyin Zhao from Kentucky World Affairs Council. So, yeah, please join me in welcoming them to the panel. About 16 months ago, the WACA board asked a committee of us to look into what should we be doing in the K-12 global education space. We do a lot of things around the country, and there's some things that maybe as a national office we can do as a national group. So we started looking into that, and we focused on two goals. One is, how do we improve and grow academic world quests, a really core anchor of what we do as the World Affairs Council. And the other was, well, what about everything else? World Quest is World Quest. We want to grow it, but if we want to be known as leaders in global education, maybe there's other things we can do in addition to that. And so those were the two goals. Who here is on the committee with us? Anyone here? Bill, Don, thank you. Anyone else? Mara back there. Thank you for being on the committee, and if any of you have questions, feel free to talk to these people because they're experts as well. All right, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about three things. One, academic world quest, and it's going to be brief, because if you need to know more, we certainly can do that. Two, we're going to talk about Beyond World Quest, where we did a survey of the councils, many of you participated, about what are your programs, and are any of them ones that we could scale up and offer to other councils. And then the third piece is talking about a trend we're seeing in the marketplace in terms of education, a trend towards global competence certification. And then we'll do a little demo of some content and wrap it up. So I'm going to ask Xiaoyin to start off with the World Quest update. Thanks.
Hello. Ooh, there you go. Do I just push? There we go. Okay, we're not going to spend too much time on the academic world quest because last year we spent almost an entire session on the education piece for academic world quest. So what we're really trying to do this time around is kind of do a bit of a report back and talk about how we might do things a little bit differently in the current kind of landscape and trends. And also because, Bill got us, we got this big, huge endowment for the academic world quest. So that's why I think it's really important for us to kind of at least get a sense of where we're going with this. Bill, do you want to say a couple of things about the bigger program before I go into that?
I'm very happy to say that we have 45 teams already signed up to participate in World Quest April 2016. We're very likely to hold it this year at the National Press Club, which will be an added benefit. We're trying to involve Gallup to do polling with the kids. That may happen this year, that may happen next year. Carlos Alvarez, a member of the board for some time, as you may have followed, has donated $500,000, which is the biggest grant in World Affairs Council of America National Office history. We have commitments of $125,000 more, wow. And that means $625 towards $1 million, which we hope to have completely raised by April 2016, so we can have a nice big announcement there. I also want to thank Amy Holland, a new board member, who's facilitated a connection with the Council for International Education Exchange. CIE gave scholarships to the first and second winning teams at this most recent World Quest. Xiaoyin's group were winners, correct?
Yes, they were last year, or this year, yes.
I might be stating it out, but they were in Spain on partial scholarships. CIE has increased the awards for the coming year, so that should make it easier for all kids to participate. We are looking to find ways of matching that, and CIE has given us a $10,000 sponsorship as well toward World Quest. So the program is healthy, the endowment is growing, and we need you to use this program to your own benefit because it's a great way to establish a pipeline for members. and we need to do a better job at national of following World Quest alumni and crowdsource fund them. $5 each is not bad. It could mean $50,000. Thank you.
Thank you. Ooh, thanks, Bill. So, last year when we talked about this, our goal was to increase visibility and participation among more councils in the academic world quest. And this year, what we really looked at is this whole idea of how do we refresh the whole competition, academic world quest. How can we bring it to a level that is as important, as recognizable as some of the other competitions that's out there? And one of the things that that Patrick is going to talk about a little bit later on is how it's a great opportunity to do so, and that's because there's so much going on in different states at the state level about global competency. And the Academic World Quest, as a very well-established program, is very well positioned to kind of enter that and provide a very easy way for students to get into, and schools to get into that. So based on that thinking, we started really just kind of refreshing some of our materials so that it really throws out and pitches to the schools, to students and teachers, exactly what are the tangible and real benefits to them to participate, and how does that tie into that a larger picture of global competency that
Xiaoyan, just so you know,
talking?
this is meant to be illustrative, not to be able to be read. Can anyone, we talked about this, and she told me that. So this
Yeah,
is,
it's not meant to be read.
We can share this, but if anyone can read that, I'm impressed. Sorry, Xiaoyan.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I do have the document, so if anyone's interested, we'd be happy to share. And in fact, we're going to be sharing some of these things at the National with Althea so that you can have access to it. So this is one of the documents that we put together that we send around in our emails as we get schools to think about participating. And then the other thing we did was just to kind of refresh our flyers to make it a little bit more kind of updated, fresh, and interesting. And my staff here, Joel, I'm just going to do a really quick shout out. He did a great job. It helps when you have young people who really understands what what young people are thinking of. So we did some of these kind of marketing tools and ways to really increase that visibility. But I think at the end of the day, it's really tying it to that bigger picture of how does this contribute to the overall global competency of schools, of what the education departments are really looking for. And then finally, this is really just a model for people who are looking to increase their participation, or who are thinking about starting it. Because I know from talking to many of you and from our conversations last year, many counselors are having very, very successful models already, and you have no problem recruiting your schools. So this may not be what is all that relevant. But if you do have a very successful model, I think it'll be very worthwhile for us to share all that at that national level, so people who are interested can have access to that. And with that, I am going to stop at the academic world quest, and I'm going to turn over to Annie, who's really going to give you an update, a report back of all the stuff that everybody talked about on their surveys last year on that big bucket list of global education programs. Thank you.
Okay, good morning. So the bucket list survey, I just want to remind everyone, the goal was to collect global education programs, program models from various world affairs councils across the country in order to facilitate the sharing and scaling of these programs throughout the WACA network. So we asked councils to share one or more education program models with us, and 30 councils responded with a total of 76 unique programs. And they were asked to recognize or categorize each program into one of three buckets. We had based on level of preparation, effort, and resources. So we had 45% of the programs fall into the high category, 41% into medium, and 14% fell into the low bucket category. And when you look at this list, which is really a snapshot, of education programs throughout the council system, you can see that we're doing some amazing and innovative programming and working with thousands of students and teachers across the country. So I think it's something we can really be proud of and give it more visibility. So it's very exciting to see what we're all doing. And there's an impressive breadth and depth of programming as well that exists. There are various creative formats used. The ones that came up most frequently were workshops, seminars, summits, simulations, travel programs for both students and teachers, courses and certificate programs to increase global competency, and the use of video conferencing and other types of technology to really facilitate those types of discussions with students, in the U.S. And abroad. Majority, in terms of the audiences reached, were high school students, followed by teachers K through 12. We also had some middle school students reached, and also university level students. Funding for the programs, we asked, how are these funded? Majority were funded by grants and contributions, then followed by corporate sponsors, about 20%, and then fee-for-service revenue. So either school districts will pay a fee, or teams would pay, or students would pay registration fees. We found that there's much interest among councils when we went ahead and did this survey. People really want to share. We want to talk about the great stuff that we're doing and better leverage the materials and resources that we put into these programs, into these efforts. And so the Global Education Task Force recommends that we develop, at least, to start the facilitation of collaboration and communication among councils, to develop an online hub where we can put this information, even starting with this spreadsheet, as simple as it is, just to see what's out there and what's available. And so we can share best practices, share our materials with each other. So this would probably live on the WACA website. So it's really in the development idea phase. And this would, again, just encourage that collaboration that I think we do sometimes one-off. In Pennsylvania, we sometimes partner with the Philadelphia Council, or we're actually doing some things with Columbus. So I think it would really facilitate that type of collaboration and communication. So stay tuned. We don't have the hub created yet, but it will be dynamic, and I think it'll be a great place for all of us to go to find out more about what we're doing across the system. So next, Patrick will discuss an educational initiative or trend that a handful of councils are part of, and it's one that's really gaining a lot of momentum across the country. So, Patrick.
Hey, Bill, will you just stand up? I wanted to just recognize Bill Clifford for, any of us that have put on an event know that it's hard to put on an event and look smiley and stand up without being exhausted. He runs the organization, and on top of that, there's a board meeting that happens in the last day of the. That's the best part. That's when we roll out the company car, and no, just kidding. But please join me in thanking all the hard work from Bill. Awesome. And thank you, Annie. We're lucky to also have Annie's new boss, Angelica, who's here and starts Monday. Would you just wave your hand in Pittsburgh, Angelica, and welcome to the World Affairs Councils. All right. So one of the trends that we're seeing as a committee, we started looking at what was out there, and we saw this trend towards certificates, and several of us are doing these. But more and more, now I'm seeing the trend outside of the council, including with state departments of education. I was at a conference in Chicago in May and one in Philadelphia last month. The whole topic, and this was with State Department of Education people. I happen to go because in Ohio, we don't have that in our Ohio Department of Education. We used to, but they got rid of it. And so they've encouraged us to try to help bolster that. California, Virginia, Indiana, North Carolina, Georgia, et cetera, California, Hawaii. Many districts are creating what's called a global certificate, a global scholars, blah, 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 a global seal, a global endorsement, And so there's a trend among these districts to create this. Now the question is, how do the schools respond to that? Because a lot of times they create these, check this, check this, check this, and then the schools are like, how do we get to it? So we wanted to talk a little bit about that. There's also districts and schools that are creating their own certificate. I mean, I just listed 2. I presented in May at Harvard with 2 people here that were doing certificates. I was talking about multi-district certificate. There's one in a district, and then there's one at a school level. It's just a big, big trend. So one of the things that we're starting to see is there's commonality among these certificates. And I'll walk you through what this says because I know it's hard to see. I call it the 4 C's of global competence. So schools are recognizing and educators are recognizing that in order for their students to be ready for the world, they got to be globally competent. That's one. The other pressure is parents. Parents are saying, my kid needs to be global, and you're teaching stuff that's not relevant anymore. And then the third motivator that I've seen is that districts are trying so hard, and schools are trying so hard, and states are trying so hard to distinguish their students. What can my student have on their diploma that's a little different, that differentiates them from Joe? Let's do a global certificate. And so I'm seeing that a lot among the schools and districts. Now, the 4 C's of global competence, I came up with the 4 C's only because I can't remember. I need things to be like easy. I was hoping there'd be only 3, but there's really 4 that are common among the certificates that we've looked at. One is the communication piece. There's language, there's nonverbal cues, there's being able to speak a language, but more importantly is the ability to communicate across cultures. How many people have gone somewhere where they do not speak the language? How many people got creative about how to communicate with someone who didn't speak the language? So there are ways, however, it's easier if you speak the language, but that's a broader description. For the schools, it's usually take 2 classes of the foreign language. That's it. But it's a broader concept. The other is content. You got to know stuff about the world. Where is Kazakhstan? What language is spoken in Brazil? I mean, these are things you just got to know, and they're classes usually, world studies, social studies, et cetera. We're seeing more and more schools integrate global into the other, the STEM, English courses, et cetera. The third piece is the schools are really trying to get their students out in the community. That's the 3rd C, community. This can mean clubs at the school. This could mean service learning, trips, volunteering, go to a festival, that kind of stuff. And then the 4th that we're seeing at most of them, although you can see there's a couple that don't have this, is a culminating project, something that brings it all together, a capstone. And these are the things that we've seen the most now in global competence. Now people often ask about travel. Some do, some don't, but as soon as you bring travel in, there's a cost issue, and that can isolate many of the students that can't afford it. And the idea is that global competence is really for every student. This is not just for true or false. You need to be globally competent because wait, let me rephrase it. Sure, you can tell I'm not an educator by training. My wife's always like, you got to think about, before you speak, you got to think and plan. I'm like, I can't. So true or false? The only reason we need global competence is because we travel to other countries. Okay. You may never leave your local town, but there are a lot of reasons why you need to be globally competent, and we could probably all talk about them. Let me just give us a fun way that we talk to students about why, for them, it's so important. This is meant to be funny. And so you can laugh. A lot of people get nervous because they're like, wait, we're talking about stereotypes. I should not laugh at this. If you're offended, that's okay too. I mean, the point is, this happens. You're offended. Okay. They're already offended, so perfect. Now I'm just going to go ahead. But the point is, you don't have to necessarily be abroad to.
Hi there.
Hi.
Nice day, huh?
Yeah, finally, right?
Where are you from? Your English is perfect.
San Diego. We speak English there.
Oh, no. Where are you from?
Well, I was born in Orange County, but I never actually lived there.
I mean before that.
Before I was born.
Yeah, like, well, where are your people from?
Awkward, right? Yeah.
Well, my great-grandma was from Seoul.
Korean. I knew it. I was like, she's either Japanese or Korean, but I was leaning more towards Korean.
Amazing.
Hamshasina. There's a really good teriyaki barbecue place near my apartment. So I actually really like kimchi.
Cool. What about you? Where are you from?
San Francisco.
But where are you from?
Oh, I'm just American.
Really? You're Native American?
No, just regular American. Oh, well, I guess my grandparents are from England.
Oh, well. Hello, Governor! What's all this then? Drop of the morning to you. Let's get a small tea. Double, toil and trouble. Mind the gap! Beware, Jack the Ripper! Bloody hell! Pip pip! Cheerio! I think your people's fish and chips are amazing.
You're weird.
Really? I'm weird? Must be a Korean thing.
So it's funny on one hand, but it shows a deep problem in our community. And so these are the kind of things that we're trying to change, all of us. But I just wanted to show you that, and it's online, so let's just turn it off. Yeah, I know. So the question becomes is how do we respond to this trend? We're seeing a lot more of these certificates. Schools want a framework upon which to hang their programs on. I'm hearing all the time, we don't want another travel program, we need a global competence system. An international baccalaureate is expensive and rigid, and so they're looking for alternatives. As I think Annie and Zhao Yin both mentioned, is several councils are starting to say, well, maybe we look at this from the framework side. Let's create a framework for the schools to adopt and be credentialed so that they can get a certificate that is the World Affairs Certificate on Global Competence, or pick your name. We all have different names. We call ours the Global Scholars Diploma. The Global Scholars Certificate is Joyce, right? Is that the right name? I know there's some edits. Yeah. And the Global Leadership Certificate in Pittsburgh. Hartford's talking about doing it. I know Zhao Yin has talked about the need for this. So there's something that we're all trying to respond to. Again, the details maybe aren't as important here, although we're willing to share. So the question is, how do we respond? The other angle that we've heard might be a way to respond is, how could we provide programs or content? So the things that hang on the framework, could provide the framework, or we could put things on the framework. And so things like Academic WorldQuest and Great Decisions might be those programs. Bill asked me, we've been developing an online learning tool, because when we start talking about scaling and numbers, all of a sudden, when you're trying to teach students about cross-cultural competence, and at each table you have someone from Argentina, from Russia, from Saudi Arabia, from Somalia, we've done that, and it's fantastic. So then we grew, and we grew. So now you're asking your friend from Russia to do 3 days, and you're asking your Brazilian colleague to do it. Becomes a very difficult trajectory to sustain. So we said to ourselves, let's try to make that experience as best we can in an online version. You can't do it, I understand. But if you're trying to reach 1,000 kids or 10,000 kids or 80,000 high school students, which is what we have in the Columbus, Ohio metro area, you can't have events in the same way. So this is our attempt at one way to address that, and we just wanted to share it because now that it's an online resource, there's no reason every council can't use it. And we're talking about how do you white label it. Maybe it's a WACA branded thing, maybe it's your local WACA. The whole point is not that it says Columbus, Ohio, but that it's something that we can use, and we've put the effort into it. So I wanted to show you a quick demo. We can do it as long as you want. But so you kind of have something to look at. Just give me a second here. Come on here. There we go. All right. So this is what the students see. This is our learning management system. So and by the way, we have some one-pagers on this. I love one-pagers because I can't read beyond a page. Usually the more bullets, the better. And if there's pictures, I'm all into it. Are these around? There's not enough for everyone. So the cross-cultural competence module is a 15-hour online course that's self-paced. That means you can go at your own pace. You can stop, you pick it up. There's no live person on the other end. We decided to focus on first on 5 countries. Before we discuss the countries, though, we talk about the cultural framework, the Hofstede cultural framework for how to understand culture. Look at stereotypes. We look at some of the components of time orientation. Are you on time or are you not? The other one is collectivism and individualism. Are you in a culture where you're willing to raise your hand and have no problem about it? Or are you in a culture where doing that you look like an idiot? So there's some of a cultural framework which educators want is some sort of a theoretical framework. That's what this first section is. The second part that each country has is a interview with a culture, like an expert, someone who's a native of that country, answering questions in sort of a Q&A format to give the students a little bit of a taste when they can't have the live person. The third piece is a game, a fun game to reinforce their learning. And then we also have a real quiz to make sure they have their comprehension. So this is a good example.
The main goal of this course is to give you new perspectives
narrated,
on cross-cultural
that kind of thing.
situations you may encounter in daily life.
Got words on
To
the
do
right.
this, you will learn some general concepts about cultures using the Hofstede Cultural Dimensions Model. Then you'll apply them as you learn about cultural norms in China, Germany, Brazil, Saudi Arabia, and Somalia. You'll complete the course by applying your knowledge to situations students may encounter in everyday life.
So you get the idea. Let me just click through some of it, turn off the sound because you don't want to hear them all the time. What does it mean to be globally competent? Who are these big company people that say it's important? In here, there's a video, what is culture? And then the students can say culture is blah, blah. To get them interacting. So you get the idea. In addition to the cultural piece, let's see why that's. We also then have a country profile. That's the one I forgot to mention that each country has. So if you're talking about Brazil, what are the pieces about Brazil that you need to know to be culturally competent? You can see them down here. You sort of have an overview. You can see some of the animation. There you go. Kids like that. My kids can't do anything unless it moves or it makes sound. I'm like, stop and think. And then I realized that's what my wife says to me. You got geography. Let's look a little bit at the geography. It's a little bit of an interactive map. What's the government like? You have places here. If you click, it takes you to a BBC article or a New York Times article. What's the living like? What are the languages? And then over here, you've got another, the heritage, the economy, and the cost of living. And this is another one that's sometimes interesting. So you can't see that, but that's cost of living index, Beijing, New York, Prague, Sydney, London, is that Berlin, Delhi, and Rio de Janeiro. Once the students have an orientation about the facts, then we want them to meet someone from that culture. So why did we pick the 5 countries we picked? Well, a combination between biggest growth markets and our largest immigrant community, which is Somalia. So when I talked to Pittsburgh about it, they said, in ours, it's probably Nepali. I could probably use this in Minneapolis and maybe I think Portland, Maine has a lot of Somalis as well, but you can adapt these and make other countries that relate. So
The most important values.
What
for the
countries
people
do
in
you-
my
what
country
values do you-
Are religion. More than 100% of the people from Somalia are Muslims. So the religion of Islam is the most important religion in the country. So religion plays a big factor in their lives, day-to-day basis. Second, I will say heritage. Somalis came from nomads, so that's really, really important to them. Also their culture, they like to hold on to their culture since they came to different countries, so they would like to bring their experiences from back where they came from.
we have that for all 5 countries. The other is a deep dive into cultural
For centuries,
components.
the people of the Arabian Peninsula have possessed a strong identity based
This is
upon
Saudi
the
Arabia.
tenets of their religion, Islam. Saudi Arabia is a modern nation that adheres to Islam and honors its Arab heritage and tradition. Christianity, Judaism, and Islam share common roots in the Middle East. Saudi Arabia is the heartland of Islam. The followers of Islam, called Muslims, believe in one God, Allah, and that Muhammad is his prophet. Saudi Arabia has occupied a special place in the Islamic world, for it is because Saudi Arabia is an Islamic country, everything
take you
in
through a
Saudi
few of these.
Arabia, most Muslims are Sunnis,
So then you have these checkpoints. You know, if you meet someone who's just made the Hajj, you would know that the person is a, you can't read this, but a Muslim who has been to Mecca for a pilgrimage. The middle one is a Muslim who fasts at Ramadan, or C, a Sunni Muslim of the Wahhabiyya sect. Who knows the answer? A. Let's see if you're right. Submit. Yes, the pilgrimage to Mecca is called the Hajj.
Arabs are known for their
Now we go into
generosity
some
and
other
hospitality.
things. So that's the cultural deep dive. The 4th component is the game part. So let's get the students, you know, they're getting bored at this point perhaps. What's the dominant language in Brazil is? All right. Kicks the ball. Woohoo! The ball goes closer to the, okay. When invited to a party at 8 in Brazil, it is best to arrive at what time? Someone said 10. All right. Let's try 10. Ambassador Shapiro knew that. Okay. All right. Yeah, that one just, it did, right? That one went back, didn't it? So the idea is that interactive games to engage the students, but then we do get to the actual content, which quizzes the students for their cultural acumen around a country. So the number of Muslims in Germany has grown mainly because of, anyone? It says marriage, conversions, the internet, or immigration. Immigration, all right, let's see if you're right. You're correct. And then we move to that, and we have those for each of the 5 countries. When all's said and done, there's a final comprehensive assessment, and then you can print out a certificate. This one was done earlier today in a meeting I was at but this allows the student to customize it at the end, and then they print it off for their records. And so we've now integrated this into our certificate program, but it's just one other way that might answer the question is, how do we respond to this growing trend around global competence and global certification? We wanted to leave some time for question, and we could do some table talk if you'd like to do that too. Okay, we have some questions. We'll take a question in, I think it was Mara in the back, and then Lisa. And if we could do the mics, that'd be great.
Thank you, Patrick. That was really great. Maura O'Donnell McCarthy from Cleveland. Can you talk a little bit about the costs for that program? It looks wonderful, but how are you passing on? You had cost of development, and are schools subscribing? Is it an individual fee? How's that working?
For this online component? Yeah. So we're piloting it right now. So right now I'm letting it be free to some. In addition, we're using it in our Global Scholars Diploma program, which is a certificate program. That costs $2,500 for a school to participate for up to 50 students. So that's how we're covering, that's probably 25% of the cost of the overall program, and when you take staff and all that into it, in terms of the live program. This online thing is probably a $50,000 to $75,000 investment, and we had funders from foundations and corporate funders, and my board allowed some money towards it. And so we're developing our business plan for then how to recoup that. And yes, we have people that are interested in buying it. Schools within our area and outside of our area. And this is one of those things where I think, well, if you're a World Affairs Council in any city and you want to have something to sell to schools, then we should talk, because there's a way for you to get the revenue from that. And it's something that they're starting to pay for. Yeah, Lisa.
Yes, Lisa with the Alaska World Affairs Council. So I might have missed it at the beginning. Did you talk about what your target is for how you want to market this, or your plan? Is it for people to do individually on their own, or is it for, when you say 50 in a school, to have schools purchase 50 or 100 packages and do it that way?
For the online piece, it was to schools to subscribe to and utilize in their classrooms, either complimentary for a social studies teacher maybe, or to do outside of class as extended learning. That was the intended audience. Although we think that, I'm a parent, and like if my kid's school wasn't doing it, that might be a way for them to gain that. The other area that we're getting a lot of interest in is pre-travel. So, my students are going to China. How do they get ready? And we could pull the course apart so that if they're going to China, they could do the China. It's got a pre-test, post-test. They could do it online. So we're talking with some travel folks, like Education First, if any of you know that. Would this be something appropriate for the pre-travel group?
So in Pittsburgh, we, just to give you a little bit of a different model, where we started out with a pilot last year, we handpicked 7 schools, and we had about 45 students enroll. And in the pilot year and now in our first year with an increased number of schools and 150 students, we're not charging a fee yet. We've kept things maybe slightly at a lower cost for now, because we're in the process of developing a course. But for our online the learning management system, the LMS, was a critical need. We had to be able to keep track of the students enrolled, their assignments they're uploading, and then ultimately have a course on the LMS that they can, to take. So the LMS we initially thought would be about $15,000 to $20,000. We were able to partner with one of our local educational agencies. It's an intermediate unit in Pennsylvania. And because they had a license, we were able to decrease the cost to about $3,000 for the implementation and training. And it's $5 a student. So ultimately, we really want to develop the potential for, making it a fee-for-service type revenue program. Right now, the feedback is that schools are interested, but we just don't know what that pricing model is. So again, we're just in the developing kind of phases of it, but it's something that we're collaborating with Columbus on to see, are there different courses that we can provide. The Crosscultural is one piece. We want to do maybe like a Great Decision style global issues, hot topics course. So, and we're getting great feedback and input from not only teachers we work with, but with students to find out what they're looking for in this type of certificate program.
Just one comment, too, is that I think it's great that something's already developed. One of the things that we don't want to do is reinvent the wheel after something's spent, all this investment being put into something that seemed to work. And again, I think it's the content that really is going to be important. At least initially, before knowing what that pricing model might be, is that I can see this, if you have a global education program already in place, to kind of be a grant-funded 1-year type of program, just to kind of roll it out and test it and see how it works. And if it does work well and you do have schools that's picking up on it, then it's a good way to then figure out what are they willing to pay for it. But it would be something that I think could be very well easily shared, and, we'd be interested, and just something to keep in mind. But I think this is more for Patrick to figure out what is the cost, if other councils want to, buy or to be able to, how might that work? But I could see councils being very interested in that part.
We're trying to figure it out and talking to the market and.
But that's important because, we have the global sky. This is something that our schools would really, I could see us, if you would tell us what the subscription cost would be for us to make this available to the schools that are participating, I think, again, this is the kind of program it'd be great to have at the national level and that all of the councils could participate in for a fee or something, or that would be given to us to help. But the other thing is the model we've used for this is that it's already brought us in one school as a sustaining institution at $5,000 just to participate in the Global Scholars and to support that. So for us, between the grants, the EITC program, that is the tax incentives that businesses get to support educational programs in Pennsylvania. It increases our attractiveness to corporations when we have a Global Scholars Program. So the schools that will come in as sustaining institution, the grants we're able to write, and the state tax dollars.
Yeah, I think Ambassador Shapiro said it well, that when you have good programs, it helps you raise money. And so for us, while the fees that we've charged, which we didn't do until the third year, which, no one likes to go from free to fee, but that was a transition, and we didn't lose anyone. We did have to negotiate with one of our leads, but now we're on a sort of a standard. But, it doesn't cover all the costs. If we did, then it wouldn't be affordable for the schools, and the schools are looking for something that doesn't cost. One school we were talking to is $125,000 to implement IB, and they have 2 graduates from the IB diploma, and so they're like, what's the alternative? So $2,500, $10,000, $15,000. Boom, boom. My time's up.
I didn't tell her to do that.
No, exactly.
I just wanted to add that in terms of grant or funding opportunities, I think our experience so far in Pittsburgh has been that it is of interest to foundations because it's a great equalizer when it comes to being able to offer these kinds of programs to underserved districts as well. So there is interest there in districts that really can't pay for it, or students can't pay for it, their families can't pay for it, to give them access. That's something that's been very important for us in Pittsburgh as well.
We were surprised, though, because with the urban district that we work with, we thought for sure they would not pay. No problem. So, and it was the privileged district that we thought wouldn't have a problem that gave me the problem. Wait a second, they're clamping down on costs everywhere. So it's interesting to know what your market is. Yes.
Patrick, I'm remembering, I know that Pittsburgh also participated. There were probably a half a dozen councils last year that had a program with Google. And Google brought a very interesting program where students could travel the world, find out, for example, in Malaysia, what students do on a daily basis, what they learn, where the Colosseum is in Rome, walk the Appian Way, go into museums. Some of that is obviously different than what you're trying to achieve, but it would seem to me that going to Google, where they are very deep pockets, might be very willing to pick up something like what you're trying to develop here and perhaps give you some grant money and also broaden, certainly, the number of schools that could pick up a program like yours, and if they wish to consolidate some of their technology that they already had in place. We had a very successful program with them and had 100 of our teachers come to the program, and they were really quite amazed by it. So it would seem to me that that might be a natural pathway to see if some foundation money from them would be available to you.
Thank you.
And we
stand a better chance of getting that Google funding if you have several councils going in with you, because it becomes a national program as opposed to only Columbus, so we're in.
Exactly. That's one of the things when we started thinking about what might the table talk be, and this we don't want to take the time now, but you can start thinking about these questions is, how do we demonstrate value in a credential-conscious world? Do we offer certificate? Were you planning to? Was anyone else here already thinking about this? Okay, in Cleveland and Hilton Head and Kentucky? Okay. It seems to be driving most prominently in the states where the State Department of Education is not. But what I'm hearing from those people, like in Wisconsin, well, we got it set up, but not a lot of schools are doing it because they got to do all the work. Don, you.
Don Sanford from the Peoria World Affairs Council. Yeah, we're having, actually I'm going to miss our final meeting in Illinois, which is Friday. We're working on state legislation. However, as a former teacher, and those of us from the smaller schools, we're making sure that it's not a mandate. So now the problem's got to be, how do you incentivize it, for the teachers? And if there's a little bit less testing in the schools, that might become a possibility, because that's been driving pretty much all of the education, especially through the STEM program, which has then neglected the international component. So that's one of the things that we're probably going to try to focus on is we can offer some things that can help them more. About 60% of the school districts in Illinois are under 600 students. So we have that conflict between the large, 7,000 student populations, especially in the Chicago area, and downstate to make criteria that we're working on, like they wanted 8 courses in international global. I'm going, well, first off, even if you have 8, that means your students aren't taking a lot of other stuff they ought to be taking too. So you're kind of sending students out with very limited education, in my opinion. So we're now debating how to say courses have integrated enough global into their program, into their curriculum, that will count it towards this certificate. The debate is, when you put this on a certificate, does a business and does a school know that there's content, that it's not just a superficial, I watched the YouTube video on what's it like to be an Asian. Great part of a component, but if that was all you did, that's pretty superficial. So our struggle right now is how to incentivize it to teachers, offer options to schools that are substance, and this is where the World Affairs Council is going to be a great aid for them, because we have a summer institute where we use the Choices program that has a lot of foreign policy type of simulations, and you bring experts in. We've looked at some other the Face to Faith that we saw last year, and they were up at our last meeting talking with us. So you want to offer them, I think, a variety of options that a particular school can invest substance in, and we said the same thing with coming to our programs. Well, just showing up at our program, that's nice, but we don't think you should get credit for that for a certificate unless you've done demonstrated something beyond just the program. So that's one of the dilemmas we're facing, and I think it would be great if more states did this, because then the World Affairs Councils could be the partner on this to say, hey, we can offer this to your school to help you meet this criteria. Yeah.
Great, a lot of great points, Don, that we haven't solved all, but the question about who cares is important, because a lot of schools and districts have it, but who cares if a college or a career doesn't recognize it? So we've spent a lot of time. We have 9 institutions that employ 350 million people in our region that have said, we recognize the Global Scholars Diploma. We have a line that describes what that means. But in reality, if someone shows up at the hiring department or at the admissions office, how recognizable is that? To Joyce's point, I think if it's one, it's easy to remember one if it's a national one than 95.
Well, I was just going to comment on Don's point is that it's really, I know that a lot of the councilors are not state councils. You represent cities or major big cities, so it's going to be different for each market. But it certainly helps when you understand what the state education department goals or requirements are. And that's one of the first things that we did is once we found out about the global competence, that we went and we met with the people who's working on this, and they were so keen on finding out who else in this state is actually working on this issue, who are able to provide the services, because what they've done is they've set up the requirements, and they've also said, well, schools are going to be assessed on these things as they are assessed on other things, but it's a self-assessment at this point. And there's ranges of, what that self-assessment might look like. But the problem is that schools do not have the program offerings to be able to meet those requirements. And I think that's, to Don's point, that's where the World Affairs Council and many international type of organizations and companies can really come and play, significantly in that sphere. And I know that if you do have the state endorsement and state need, it makes it a lot easier for grants, for foundations to fund it, at least at the initial phase when you find that needs, once you identify the need, and then moving from there makes it a lot easier.
Yeah.
I just wanted to mention too that, we're finding that we have to be really flexible with our model because of, the points that you made. I mean, some schools students, they're already, done with their language requirements and they're ready to move on to something else. Or we found that when we brought these schools together, there was such a gap of knowledge among the schools that we, had to really work to get the students kind of on the same page. So, we're really taking kind of a multi-pronged combination approach with how we're building the program. And, we've had success because of the pre-existing partnerships we've had with school districts. So when we start moving beyond that, I think we'll be probably relying more on the network. But so far, we've been really pleased with the results, and the demand has definitely exceeded our expectations. We were striving for 100 students in our first official year with, as I mentioned, 45 from the pilot, and we're at, pushing 150 and more kind of lined up, ready to go. We're also talking to different admissions offices, departments at universities, and the initial word is that they're very excited about it. They think it does make the student more competitive to, be selected in their colleges. So we want to also have these individuals as part of our advisory committee, in addition to, corporations and the like.
And Joyce, I keep thinking of this thing, if I were to go at a local level to either a school or a funder and said, we're delivering the World Affairs Councils of America, whatever, which is recognized by Google, and et cetera, all of a sudden, many problems would go away. And so, but let me just say, there's others in this market. And there's ones that are moving fast and they have resources at a national level. So we either have to make a decision and move, or we need to say, we'll go a different route. And I think that's some of the questions that I will be asking the board to think about. And if you have thoughts on what you might want Xiaoyin and I to say at the board meeting, then please let us know. We are at our time, and like all good council events, if you don't end on time, you lose members. So we are ending for Bill to come back up. Thank you all so much.